Human rights are rights that are considered to be the most fundamental rights one can possess as a human being. Perhaps it is a right of that one can claim for being a human being, or a right that all human beings are expected to universally inherit. Human rights do form the core of almost all forms of legal systems across the world, including those that are national and transnational in nature. As a concept, it has said to have evolved across recorded history. The most earliest conceptual acceptance of universality of human rights, one that crosses the thresholds of community identities and defined social constructs, have been traced to ancient Greece. Amongst the Hellenistic schools of thought, Stoicism has been identified by historians to have first formulated the universality of human conduct and nature. According to historians, these values universally applicable to human beings' ideas can be traced to Sophocles, the great Athenian playwright, and his play called Antigone. In the play, universality of divine laws, ones attributed to the gods, that are applicable to all human beings without distinction, are expressly demonstrated. This is the earliest reference to universally applicable assertion of rights as it is understood in modernity. In Asia, human rights was expressly demonstrated by religious systems and doctrinal ideas that emerged, in opposition to Vedic doctrines. Buddhism was founded in ancient India sometime in mid-6th centuries BCE. As a doctrinal system, Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, literally meaning the awakened one in Sanskrit, was a radical departure from a caste-based social divide. Built on the concept of Four Noble Truths and transcendentalism to nirvana, it purported the commonality amongst human beings despite the social divide. Patronized by Mauryan monarchs such as Emperor Ashoka, it spread towards South, Southeast, and East Asia through trade and evangelism. In China, thinkers such as Confucius in 551 BCE started philosophizing on responsibilities of common individuals in communities with foundational duties. According to him, freedoms were directly associated with duties, thus reflecting a level of attribution of imperativeness in the conduct of human affairs. This, inevitably shaped East Asian thought of fundamental values influencing rights. In Rome, human rights were best demonstrated in the jus gentium legal principle that, according to historians, was first officiation by a major nation adopting natural applicability of some law to all men, and, in context of the Romans, all nations. In the East, by the 8th century CE, with the emergence of Adi Sankara, philosophies such as Advaita began to take form that eliminated social and general differences between human beings, purporting common origins, and they discussed the idea of a human being as a Atma, without distinguishing the Atma from the environment, thus suggesting universality with nature. These concepts were largely restricted to South and Southeast Asia. In the West, post-European Renaissance, Italian theologian Thomas Aquinas wrote one of his two literary contributions, more notably, the Summa contra Gentiles. Dutch scholar Hugo Grotius made notable contributions to the universality of fundamental rights in his formulation of international law. Along with humanist Joseph Scaliger, Grotius made enormous contributions on legal fundamentals that crossed tribal, social, and national boundaries. Law that begins with individuals has often been attributed to Grotius. In England, under King John, the Magna Carta Libertatum was written recognizing that all citizens of his kingdom were his subjects. It defined and allotted and protected freedoms granted to state subjects. A revolutionary system, the document formed the basis of the English Constitution in those days. It also inevitably influenced different constitutional legal systems down the line. In 1628, Petition of Right was also another revolutionary progression which was drafted by the House of Commons against King Charles. It defined explicit rights, particularly focused on taxes, the rights of the Parliament, which was previously dismissed by the monarch. The critical historical importance of the Petition of Right was highlighted particularly after King Charles was compelled to accept it, and it thus became a bona fide constitutional document. Ultimately, in 1689 under William III and Mary II, the English Bill of Rights was adopted, which outlined explicit civil rights and finally gave a parliament more legal control over the affairs of a country than previously afforded. Some of the more important ideas the bill adopted were that there was no divine mandate to rule, monarchy could not suspend specific laws or increase taxes, and that monarchs could not interfere with parliamentary elections or debates. These were radical new ideas in these times. Suddenly, common people could dictate terms to their more powerful counterparts. 18th-century thinkers such as Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau, and Locke further undermined institutional structures of control and championed inalienable rights that were to be deemed much more foundational than previously purported. Various thinkers were influenced by Locke. One in particular was Thomas Jefferson, who was an important proponent in the Declaration of Independence of 13 American British colonies on July 4, 1776. The evolution of human thought on fundamental rights are best demonstrated up to this document in history, which states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Though during the American Civil War, multiple thinkers thought that the application of such defined human rights were skewed and African slaves were still employed in the South. The Civil War lasted between April 12, 1861 to May 9, 1865, by which time slavery had been outlawed. By this time, natural laws had now transformed to man's rights, meaning men were, in definition, born free and thus were in possession of some fundamentals that could not be disregarded. Various thinkers further contributed to the conceptual understanding of fundamental human rights, including Edmund Burke and David Hume, who were alarmed at the violence of the Bloody Revolution in France between 1789 and 1799. In this period, Europe witnessed a bloody societal transformation of France, which was once considered to be the bastion of great thinkers. The revolution meant that the relationship between the large masses and their rulers had been changed forever, when a great majority of the populace began rejecting feudalism. The French National Constituent Assembly is often credited to have introduced fundamental rights to various modern conceptual understanding of human rights in their Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. The French finally, after a long tug-of-war with the nobility, executed King Louis XVI in January 21, 1793. His consort, Queen Marie Antoinette, was executed about 9 months later in October 16, 1793. The general tug-of-war between royalists and the revolutionaries continued as the National Constituent Assembly raised its own army, with the infamous Napoleon Bonaparte himself putting down royalist revolt in Paris in October 5, 1795. This execution led to regional and global complications concerning rights of man and the consequences should they not be realized. Monarchies across Europe were intimidated as control over the masses was shaken with the French Revolution, which, however bloody, further evolved the modern concepts of human rights. While there were churnings through World War I between July 28, 1914 to November 11, 1918, conceptual thought on human rights were limited due to extensive conflict. Monarchies across Europe adapted to the lessons learned in France and granted more rights to their respective parliaments. However, after World War I, the world was to see another violent revolution. Accepted and disputed at the same time by various historians, it is often deliberated if the French Revolution had influenced the Russian Revolution. The Russian Bolsheviks demonstrated this when they adopted the Marseillaise as their first anthem, though it is also said that the predicament that led to the Russian Revolution was an entirely different one from the French. The Russians were disillusioned by the rule of Nicholas II. Russia was losing heavily during World War I, and this led to widespread famine and unemployment. Termed the February Revolution, it started with spontaneous protests in the capital of Imperial Russia, Petrograd, leading to abdication of Tsar Nicholas II after soldiers garrisoned in the city joined the protests. Nicholas II, along with the royal family, was executed on July 17, 1918, bringing an end to the Romanov dynasty. A provisional government was formed, only for another revolutionary civil war to break between the royalists called the Whites and Bolsheviks, called the Red Army, in 1918. It is interesting to note that spillover revolutions could be found in this period in countries like Ukraine and countries in East Asia like China later in history. Lenin and Trotsky were said to have started the revolution with a proletariat agenda. As Japan invaded China in July 7, 1937, further churnings in East Asia were happening as the populace were being influenced by the revolution in Russia. The Chinese Communist Party was founded in 1921 in Shanghai, influenced by the Russian Revolution, declared their intentions to form a new government during the war against the Japanese. By 1949, the uprising against feudalism, capitalism, and all aspects of ideas that were considered to be oppression were outlawed and destroyed. Proponents of such ideas were executed as the country embarked on a socialist revolutionary reformation. Similar revolutions occurred all across the world, from Southeast Asia to South America. The key ideology behind the Cold War has been said to be the definition of what freedom of human beings actually means. While capitalism was said to be for personal freedoms, the socialist idea was one about community and equal share of common resources. Conflict typically arose throughout history without a lack of consensus concerning human rights across the world as per various historians. This was often demonstrated by tangible definitions of ideologies such as capitalism or socialism or communism that, in essence, sought to define rights of man and model of governance. Further in history, freedom fighters such as Mahatma Gandhi, fighting for the Indian independence from the British, introduced important civil disobedience concepts to the movement for additional rights. Concepts such as satyagraha were important in the Indian independence movement, which ultimately granted freedom to India from the British. These concepts were further honed and were reflected in the struggles of Nelson Mandela against the apartheid in South Africa, as well as the civil rights movement in the United States by Dr. Martin Luther King. All proponents of such civil disobedience were often incarcerated under draconian laws by respective regimes. By the 1940s, the world witnessed a new era of evolution in human rights fundamentals. While formed in 1945, United Nations adopted the first intercivilizational definition of modern human rights in Paris as General Assembly Resolution 217A on December 10, 1948. This was the first time in human history when common parameters were applied to what was to become the modern definition of the rights of man. It consisted of 30 articles and was translated to 500 languages. As of today, more than 97 resolutions have been adopted by the Human Rights Council. While the overall impact of the UN human rights has been somewhat negligible, overall, the organization has still managed to help as 40,443 victims of torture from more than 78 countries were rehabilitated. More than 15,371 victims were rescued from slavery-related issues from 33 countries, with more than 61 individuals offered fellowship from 37 countries. More importantly, 189 urgent actions have been registered for persons who have suffered from enforced disappearances. With multinational presence, the UN human rights body is one of the most important central institutions that afford formal support to important human rights activities. Other organizations doing important work in providing impartial rights-based advisement and action are Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, International Labour Organization, and others. While the overall historical trajectory of the toil, and, on multiple occasions, conflicts have often threatened to derail stability, in the 21st century, the situation is not entirely admirable. From the West, to the Middle East, Asia, and Oceania and beyond, there are multiple challenges that need to be addressed, and as a species we are still at a nascent stage in addressing these fundamental challenges. Loss of human rights also has an economic aspect, with CESR stating that there is a positive relationship between human rights and economic growth, adding an added dimension to economic policy making. These are the facts collated by the Factuality team for your consideration. We have collected these facts in an impartial manner, to ensure that facts prevail and information reaches us, as it is, so that we can make up our own minds. As per our maxim, independence of thought is paramount. We take our leave with this report and hope that you have found this informative. Please do subscribe and like the video if you have found it useful. Until the next report, farewell.